inshallah.
Okay, give me 1 second. I want to actually turn on my camera.
Oh, we have 7 attendees now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like out of nowhere. Okay. Let's get.
Assalamualaikum everyone. We're just getting started, inshallah. Just give us a few minutes.
Oh, I was on mute. Assalamualaikum. We have more people joining. Okay, do you want to give it a few more minutes or should we start?
No, I think we can begin, inshallah, because we have to take a break from Maghrib.
All right, guys. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Hopefully everyone is doing well. So we're going to get started. So welcome to our hot topic session for today. We're going to be discussing women empowerment. And this is really a hot topic. You know, living in the 21st century, we have been faced with a lot of different narratives and opinions on what it means to empower women. So, you know, but being a Muslim, we have to have this conversation with, you know, aligning ourselves back with Islam and seeking solutions within Islam. So today we have two great women here who are going to be tackling this issue. We have Sister Kulsoom, who is a certified life coach, counselor, motivational speaker, and author. She holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from York University. She also serves as a Muslim chaplain at University of Toronto, Mississauga. She's also 2 courses away from completing her associate's degree in Islamic Sciences from Mishka University. She's an instructor at I3 Institute and inspires to spread the message of Islam with the various projects she's involved with. So we also have Sister Sana Mohammed, who is a religious studies major at McMaster University and has been studying with I3 Institute since 2018. She's also an instructor for the Young Da'i program that I3 launched in 2020. So without taking any more time, I'll let our speakers jump in and give their opening talk on the topic.
Alrighty, so assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, everyone. And thank you so much, Narusha, for that introduction. So bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah, rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. So when the term hot topic comes up, it kind of gets a little bit scary because this is a topic that, you know, everyone wants to know about, everyone wants to hear about. And so I particularly am super excited to be talking about this and finally shedding light on some of the questions that you guys have. And, you know, we can see about opening up the floor towards the end and see what concerns and questions you guys have about this topic. But when it comes to women empowerment, I want to start off by saying one thing, right? It's really important to understand why women empowerment is on the rise. Whether you're Muslim, whether you're not Muslim, you want to understand what the roots are and where that is kind of coming from, right? And so we have to understand that women have been oppressed. They have been abused. They have been raped. They have been mistreated, and they're not given their rights in a lot of different countries, including, you know, where I'm from currently in Canada. So any group of people that go through such pain, any group of people, right? Any group of people that goes through such pain is eventually going to call for justice, is eventually going to stand up, is eventually going to want some change. And women are no different, right? Women can be very vocal, they're very strong. And again, like I mentioned, they've been through a lot of different things. So there's nothing wrong with calling for justice, right? If someone comes and they push me and they start cursing at me and they mistreat me, I'm going to want to act and do something about it as well, right? So there's nothing wrong with calling for justice. However, it becomes a little problematic when you figure out who you're calling to justice for. Like, who are you calling to justice? Who are you reaching out to justice for? And where are you looking to kind of get that justice? So what we propagate for has to be correct. Who we reach out to has to be correct. So if we begin to, turn to man-made laws, we're definitely going to fail. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Sister Sana will also shed light on that. If we turn to man-made laws, we're definitely going to fail, because a system that's made up from a basis that is imperfect and biased cannot achieve justice, right? So that's what's happened in the last couple of years and many, many years to come, actually. So, women have gone through a lot of pain, they've gone through a lot of trials, but they've resorted to ideals that are man-made. So all the stuff that we talk about today, we're not saying that women cannot call for justice. I think as women, we understand the pain of women more than probably anyone else, right? So we're not saying don't call for justice. Be careful who you're turning to justice to. Okay, so in the last, many, many years, people have resorted to individualism. Women have resorted to laws that are biased themselves. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that. So what we need to do is understand that we are lacking an Islamic system, right? An Islamic system, one that is perfect, one that is not man-made, one that, has the rights for everyone, for women, for men, for orphans, for all the different races. And so that's kind of the message that we're coming at you with today, inshallah. So that's the kind of stuff I wanted to mention. And let's see if Sister Sana has anything to mention as well, inshallah.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. So alhamdulillah, Kulsoom gave, a really good explanation as to, what women's empowerment is and what has it become over the years, especially in the West. And so I think for today, inshallah, we will be focusing on, like a Western context, because we do live here in Canada. And the truth of the matter is that a lot of Western ideologies have actually been propagated and spread to non-Western countries as well, right? And so from a more like Muslim perspective, Western ideologies have made its way into the Muslim world as well, through like missionaries, Orientalists, religious studies scholars, and also through those Muslim individuals who have taken on Western ideologies, right? So Muslims who have become liberal, Muslims who have become feminist, or Muslims who have become secular, right? And so for my few minutes that I just want to explain a little bit about women's empowerment, I want to explain why, like the perspective that we should take when discussing this, especially as Muslims, is that we need to understand where women's empowerment, the whole idea of women's empowerment, where it really came from a Western perspective, right? And it really comes from three ideologies. It comes from secularism, liberalism, and feminism. And through the last 100 years, these three ideologies have really been promoted and propagated as the ideal isms to grant women that freedom and liberty and enlightenment and advancement and things like that. And so to even start this conversation of women's empowerment, and especially from a Western perspective, you really need to understand these three political ideologies, because I think oftentimes people do forget that liberalism, secularism, and feminism are actually all very political ideologies, because the individuals who call for these things are not just calling for a change in societal perspectives of life. They're actually they're calling for a change in politics, right? And so to start us off, what is liberalism? And I just want to quickly give very brief explanations as to what these are, because they are going to come up, guaranteed they're going to come up in this discussion. And so liberalism, essentially, right, from a political perspective, from a political standpoint, liberalism is essentially the ideology that you as a politician, your main priority is to maintain the individual rights and freedoms of your citizens. So liberalism calls for every politician to have this as their main focus, that you as a politician, your main priority is to protect my individual rights and freedoms. And my individual rights and freedoms is basically whatever it is that I want to do. So I have the freedom of thought, freedom of religion, behavior, as long as I don't hurt anybody. So basically, as long as I'm not murdering or raping anybody, I can basically do whatever I want. And so, yes, this actually does promote individualism as well. Kulsoom mentioned it a little bit, that you focus on the self. It's all about me, right? It's not about the other. And so liberalism does have a connection to individualism as well. And then feminism is also connected to liberalism. But feminism is a little bit different just because it does focus on women, right? It kind of is pretty obvious just from the name. And so the way I want to explain what feminism is, I actually want to explain it in a very broad way, just because I do want to consider that there are lots of feminists, and many of them have actually a very different perspective on what feminism is, right? So if you ask maybe a liberal feminist, right, like what is feminism, they're going to give you the definition of what they think. But then if you ask a different feminist who's maybe not a liberal feminist, right, they'll give you a different perspective. And so just just keep in mind that different feminists have different ideas as to what feminism actually is. So the way I want to explain feminism is, first of all, recognizing that other people might have a different opinion as to what feminism is. And so I want to actually explain what feminism is from a very broad perspective, from I think as broad as I could possibly make it. And so what I would say feminism is that essentially it's the concept and the ideology that women should be liberated from any form of societal or political expectations that are upon them, whether it's from the political system or religion. And it is also the call for women to be equal to men in all aspects of political and social life, right? So if men get to vote, women get to vote. Women, if men get to work, women get to work, et cetera, et cetera. And so from a very broad perspective, that's what I would say feminism is. And then the last one is secularism. So secularism, as many of you probably already know, right? It's essentially just a separation of religion or religious traditions, religious ideologies from the rest of society. So it's not just a separation of religion from politics, but it's actually a separation of religion from everything. It's being religious, if you are a religious person, which I'm assuming most of you here are, then secularism really calls for you to not practice anything that's typically, I'm assuming most people here are Muslim, or all of the people here are Muslim. That basically secularism calls for that you are not allowed to practice your tradition, which is the Islamic tradition, in public, basically. It's the call for religion, whether it's Islam, Christianity, whatever, to just be in the household, at the mosque, at the church, whatever, but not in general society. And so with having, inshallah, understanding those three ideologies, liberalism, secularism, and feminism, then we can really, inshallah, start discussing what women empowerment even is, because these three ideologies over the past 100 years have been promoted as the ideologies which liberate women and empower women. And so that's why talking about women's empowerment, especially living in the West, you would need to understand what liberalism is. You can have that discussion. I'll conclude with that, and I'll hand it back to Nayusha.
All right, that sounds super, super interesting. I feel like the rest of this session is going to be very, very informative. Alhamdulillah, inshallah. But Maghrib has kicked in, and we're planning to take a 10-minute break. So you guys can all go pray and then come back to this link, and then we'll carry on with our Q&A. So inshallah, let's come back. Let's aim to get back here for 5:35, inshallah, and we'll go on from there.
Oh, I think you're muted, Nirusha.
So I was just saying that let's just jump straight into the questions that we have. So our first question for today is, how does Islam empower women?
Okay, so I guess I can start, inshallah, but can everybody hear me? Okay,
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so how does Islam empower women? SubhanAllah, I would probably, if I was the one asking this question, I would ask it in the opposite way. How does Islam not empower women? what, because the word empowerment, like what is empowerment, right? So empowerment is essentially like, okay, if a woman becomes empowered, it basically means that she has the ability to make choices, have control of things. Like it's really about empowering her, right? And so how does Islam empower women? In so many ways, like, and how I want to, inshallah, go about answering this question, because typically I feel like people who have answered this question have basically just, started listing out different Islamic laws on, oh, look, like this is what Islam gave women. Women can get a divorce, women can marry who they want, women can get a job, for example, women have property rights, women, they have, they're eligible for inheritance, for example. So typically when people ask this question, that's how I feel like people have answered the question. But the way that I want to answer, inshallah, is to actually just really like quickly compare Islam to other ideologies. Because really when we put Islam into its context, especially at the beginning, 1400 years ago, it really was revolutionary. And I mean that in every sense of the word, because the idea that women had value, women could own property, like this was unheard of, right? Whether we're looking at it from a polytheist perspective, because, as most of you already know, assuming that most of you are Muslim, you have already learned how the polytheists in Arabia at that time treated women. Like you're all aware, right? And so when Islam came into the game, it was a life changer, right? But within the Western perspective that we live in, right, the dominant religious traditions here are not paganism. It's not paganism, right? It's really Judaism, Christianity, more so Christianity because there's just more Christians than Jews. And so what I want to quickly do is actually just compare Islam to Judaism and Christianity. Because, a lot of feminists come from these traditions and they don't really understand Islam. And so they assume that Islam is like Christianity and Judaism. So therefore, whatever oppression they felt while whether living in the Western society, whether they were living in a religious household or a non-religious household, however they felt about Judaism and Christianity, they basically imposed those thoughts and those feelings onto Islam without really understanding it. And so if we really take a step back and try to understand, okay, what did Islam give women? How has Islam discussed women, right? Well, we know that Islam gave women lots of rights, and women, have the rights in education. They can get a job if they want, right? And even just from a virtuous perspective, like men and women are equal in the eyes of Allah. But when it comes to Christianity and Judaism, that's not always the case. And so just to give you guys a few examples from Judaism, Christianity, I'll start with Judaism. And actually, before I say that, when it comes to feminism and the beginning of feminism, which was really around 100 years ago, it wasn't many women, they were not just critiquing and challenging politics of their time, right, in America, Canada, etc. They were also critiquing and challenging the Bible, because the matter of the fact is that these Western societies are either predominantly Christian or Jewish. And so naturally, their religious traditions have a an impact on their society and their politics, right? And so when feminism began, Western female scholars of the Bible and critics came about. And actually, even to this day, Western biblical scholarship still deals with this stuff, even till now. There's entire biblical scholarship on just like women in the Bible and how women are viewed, how they're portrayed, are they even included, right? And so when we look at it, at least from the Jewish perspective, we're really talking about the Jewish Bible, which is the Hebrew Bible, right? And so when looking at the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, you'll actually notice, and there's a lot of criticism around this, that, women are hardly mentioned or even talked about. And when women are mentioned, they're either wives, right? Or they're widowed, or they're raped. But the whole discussion of within the Bible and all of the narratives in the Bible, at least the Hebrew Bible, they're either talking about men or and women aren't included, or if women are included, then they don't really have a prominent role, or they're just kind of like this victim or like a wife, basically. They're just kind of like this side character. And then even other criticisms that people have had about Judaism and the Hebrew Bible is just even like the pronouns that are used in their texts. You know how in Arabic, English, French, there's masculine and feminine words, right? Well, Hebrew, which is the language that the Hebrew Bible is written in, also has masculine and feminine terms. And, for someone at least who knows Hebrew, you'll notice that actually the terms used, even just pronouns in the Hebrew Bible, rarely are they feminine. So, because this is actually a very big difference compared to the Quran, right? Because when you read the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually talks directly to women and about women multiple times. We know that because, we've all read the Quran. But that's not the case for the Hebrew Bible, right? Like women are barely mentioned, they're not included in the conversation, and even just using female pronouns is barely there. And so that's from one perspective, right? And as you guys know, Judaism predominantly is heavily focused on law, right? Jews follow a lot of laws. We all know that. And so naturally, Jewish law is also a pinpoint of criticism, because essentially how Judaism works, okay, is that Judaism, like Jews can't really practice Judaism without the Jewish temple, which was in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. Okay. And so in order for them to really practice Judaism holistically and follow all of the laws, they actually need the temple, which you guys would know because that temple actually is right beside, or where it used to be, is right beside Al-Aqsa, right? So if you guys have ever heard of the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem, like that's actually where that temple used to be. It was in that exact spot. And so the temple, how it works is that they believed, right? This is what they thought, was that actually Allah dwelled in the temple on earth. Like that was his resting place on earth. And that area in the temple was actually called the tabernacle. Okay, I'm sure this is like super new information to most of you, but this is what they believed. Okay, and so they believed that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually dwelled there on earth in the tabernacle, and that was in a particular place in the temple. The temple was actually quite large, and so how it was organized was that the individuals who had a higher status were actually able to access areas in the temple that were closer to the tabernacle. So basically, how close you can get to the tabernacle signified your status, like with God. And, obviously, as you could probably guess, men could get closer to the tabernacle than women. But what I find it pretty interesting, though, is that even when Jewish women, right, were, because Judaism actually also has a lot of purity laws and about, okay, if you have like sexual intercourse, like how do you purify yourself so you can go pray, right? And they have a lot of purity laws around menstruation and things like that as well. And so if a Jewish woman was on her menses, right, she actually could not be in the area that she would usually be in. She actually had to be further away from the tabernacle. So how it generally would work is that it would be Gentiles, right? So Gentile is a term for non-Jews, anyone who just wasn't Jewish. Gentiles had the furthest position from the tabernacle in the temple because they were allowed to be in the temple. And then women, and then Jewish men, and then scholars, and then like the high priest, right? So the high priest was the only person who could go actually inside the tabernacle. Nobody else could. But women had a further distance away from the tabernacle than men. So that's what a lot of critics would comment on. But even when she becomes in a state of impurity, her position, she actually loses her position. She's not allowed in the area that she's usually in. She actually has to go further from the tabernacle, even further than the Gentiles, which weren't even Jewish. And so when it comes to Jewish law, there's a lot of criticism around it as to why women actually oftentimes they're not even considered to have the same value as men. Like at least, from Muslim to Muslim, right? Like we understand why sometimes men have laws that pertain to them, and sometimes women have laws that pertain to them because men and women are different, right? But in Islam, we know that in the eyes of Allah, like we actually are on the same playing field. Like I don't lose my value because I'm a woman, right? But not everybody thinks like that. And so there's a lot of criticism to Judaism for those few reasons. I just gave a few examples. And then when it comes to Christianity, well, it's a whole other ball game, right? Because the Christian Bible is not the exact same as the Jewish Bible, right? So there are differences, but a lot of criticisms that Christian women will have, just to quickly name a few, is that, for example, and some things that Paul had said, right? If you guys are aware of Christianity and how, Paul had a very large impact on the tradition, he basically said in some of his letters, which are in the New Testament, that women shouldn't be talking in the church. And so that's one example. Another example is that, in Christianity, there is a hierarchy as well. So in Judaism, it's really God, men, women, but well, in Israel, right? And then the rest of humanity, because Judaism also claims that Israel, the people of Israel, actually have a higher status than everybody else. But in Christianity, it's God, Jesus, men, women, right? So Christian women have also commented on that as well. And the reason for that being, from the way that I've come to understand it, is that the reason why men have a higher status than women is because, well, Jesus was a man, and to them, Jesus is God, and men are more like godly, right? So that's another example. And the last example I'll mention quickly is that in Christianity, Eve is oftentimes, associated with the original sin in Christianity, because they believe that everyone is born into sin. So you were actually born a sinner. Whereas in Islam, we know that we're born pure, right? But they don't think that. They think that you're actually born sinful because of Adam and Eve. And oftentimes, Eve was the one who got blamed because how the story goes in the first 3 chapters of Genesis, which is the first book of the Bible, narrates that story. And Eve gets blamed, basically. So like God asks Adam first, why did you eat that fruit from the tree, right? And then Adam blames Eve. And then Eve blames the serpent, which is Satan from the Christian view. And then God condemns them to earth and banishes them because they're punished, right? So that's a very brief overview of what happens. And so Eve, throughout Christian history, has been blamed, right? And so because Eve is a female, a lot of women, Christian men actually said, no, like you, a woman, you are an evil person because Eve was the reason why we're here. And so because you're a female and Eve's a female, then women are basically the reason why we're here. We're stuck here and we're not in heaven with God, right? And so just giving you guys a few examples as to how Christians and Jews have interacted with Judaism and Christianity as their ideologies. 100 years ago, basically that changed with feminism, right? And that's why people started critiquing the Bible a lot, because people still do, because of these things, and because women actually were not valued equally to men. And then you compare this to Islam, right? Like, especially 1400 years ago, the idea that men and women were equal in the eyes of God was unheard of, even from a biblical perspective. And so that's really what I wanted to say about this question was just to compare what Islam gave women versus what everybody else got, because the difference is huge, basically. That's what I would say for that. But Kulsoom can go ahead and give her her thoughts.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair. That was actually very detailed, and I really appreciated the fact that you kind of contrasted it with like some of the other religions and how they kind of view women. And I was looking through the chat, and there's some very interesting comments and questions and everything, which inshallah we'll address. But one of the sisters mentioned, something about literal interpretation. And I wanted to comment on that, because when we ask a question such as, how does Islam empower women? It's really hard to define what empower means, because empower to a group of people could mean something very different. And empower to another group of people could be very, very different. So when we say a literal interpretation, I feel like this day and age, there isn't really one main interpretation, because there is a group of people that when you talk about being empowered, they're talking about, why aren't women able to have 4 husbands, and why are, something like that. And so to them, if you don't explain to them why women cannot have 4 husbands, to them, it seems like, okay, well, there you go. Islam doesn't empower women. Right. So I wanted to comment on that, because when we ask such a question, it's really important to understand by whose definition and by whose point of view are we asking the question. But let's take empowerment in the term of, does Islam give women rights? Does Islam promote, different roles of women? And before we even get to that, I think Sister Sana kind of touched upon it. She said each gender has their own role. And I think to even further the discussion today about women empowerment, this is the main thing that we have to understand, that each gender has their own set of roles. So males have their own roles and women have their own roles. Now, within the roles, 110% Islam empowers women, right? Because there's many rights that women are given. There's many ways that Islam protects the rights of women. Like if you learn the fiqh of women, which is, the laws pertaining women, whether it's with regards to, marriage, whether it's regards to menstruation or postpartum, all of that stuff. There's so many laws pertaining women. You're going to see the different ways that Islam empowers women, right? For example, when it comes to inheritance laws, I took a course and it was talking about the different inheritance laws that are there. And there's actually more inheritance laws for women than there are for men. So I actually felt like, poor men, so when we say empower women, 110%, right? Islam gives all of these different rights to women. It gives all of these different ways to protect the rights of women. It encourages women in different roles. It encourages women in entrepreneurship. It encourages women, to kind of take on scholarship, and encourages women, within the marriage, outside of the marriage. And so I think the onus falls on us to go and learn Islam, because when we learn Islam, when we learn all the different rulings of Islam, that's when you're going to see that, yes, Islam does empower women. But if you're going to come in with the notion of empowerment that is being preached outside, it's always going to seem biased to you, right? So I just kind of wanted to point that out. And that's pretty much what I wanted to say. When we ask, does Islam empower women? Islam in the sense is the trueness. You're not going to get that from any other ideology. For example, feminism, the word feminism is coming up a lot. And Sister Sana did a really good job in kind of defining it. You're not going to get that from feminism, because their idea of happiness is getting equality, right? So empowerment equals equality. Happiness equals equality. And so anything that doesn't fall in their definition of equality means automatically that it's backwards. And again, I wanted to emphasize, if you as a person, you're here today, alhamdulillah, there's many, many people that are tuning in from different areas of the world. if you're going to continue the discussion and the questions and kind of hearing it, I think the point about each gender having their own roles and kind of Islam giving each role, its due right is kind of the mentality that you want to come in with. So with regards to the question, that's what I would say. And if we didn't answer your question, then definitely you're more than welcome to ask again in the Q&A or comment in the chat box, and inshallah we'll try to clarify as much as possible, inshallah. So we can go on to the next question. Oh, Nirusha, I think you're muted.
Inshallah, sounds good. So our second question here that we have is, who were some great women in Islam? Oh, can you guys hear me? Okay, so our next question is, who were some great women in Islam from the past?
Yeah, I love this question because this question gives us now the opportunity not to dive into specific, pre-made beliefs, but to now give you an example of all the different, women in Islam in history. So the three that I wanted to highlight are one of the common ones, some of the common ones that we always hear. The first one is Sumayya radiallahu anha, may Allah be pleased with her. And she is the first martyr in Islam, right? She was resilient despite her trials. She stood strong in her beliefs and she stood strong against the oppression. And so it really shows that, a woman can be resilient. A woman can, go through so much and still be able to stand in front of her oppressors. It doesn't matter who it is. So her example is really, really inspiring for me personally. And I hope all the women here as well. Another common one, which I really like because I'm an entrepreneur as well, is Khadija radiallahu anha, right? She was the wife of the Prophet alayhi salam, and she was a successful entrepreneur and a businesswoman. So for all the entrepreneurs here, then you can definitely resonate with her. And, she was competing with some of the famous men in her area, and she proved to be one of the top in her field. So if we're talking about empowerment, again, she was standing alongside men in her field and she was still able to, step up in her game and kind of be successful with that. So that's another example. And the last example that I have is Aisha radiallahu anha, right? So we spoke about just standing in the midst of trials. We spoke about entrepreneurship, but look at how Islam promotes just scholarship and studying, right? She was one of the greatest scholars in Islam. So being a woman doesn't, contrary to a lot of people's beliefs, it doesn't stop you from, seeking knowledge and going to school and attaining different types of education. Islam actually promoted women to seek education. She would love to teach, and she even taught men in a lot of different examples that we see. So the three examples that I wanted to outline were Sumayya, Khadija, and Aisha radiallahu anha, may Allah be pleased with them. So inshallah, Sister Sana has some more examples.
Yeah, of course. So, subhanAllah, as Nairusha had mentioned earlier, that I am a major in religious studies. And so what I find oftentimes in religious studies is that there's this unnecessary assumption that when Muslim women had no say in Islamic scholarship at all, right? And so when I hear that, I feel like, why are you saying this misinformation? Because subhanAllah, so many Muslim women have actually engaged in Islamic scholarship and actually were scholars themselves. And so, when answering this question, I'm going to try to just have a focus on some female Muslim scholars because there's this weird, biased assumption that Muslim women have had no say in Islamic scholarship, which just isn't true. And so I think the first example of a female scholar in Islamic history, her name, the first example that I would give is Sitt al-Wuzra. Okay, so she was a scholar and she actually mastered Islamic law, and she gave lectures on al-Bukhari in Damascus and Egypt. So that's one example of a female Muslim scholar of Islam. Another example is she's a scholar as well and a jurist. Her name is Aisha bin Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqa. right? So she was a scholar and a jurist, and she actually taught Imam Malik, who is the founder of the Maliki school of thought. And the last example that I'll give is another female scholar named Saida Nafisa, and she is the daughter of Hassan, who is the son of Ali ibn Abu Talib. And again, she taught Islamic law as well, and she actually taught Imam Shafi as well, and she also funded his education. So subhanAllah, these are just 3 quick examples of Muslim women who have engaged in not just Islam and the aqidah of Islam, but also the fiqh, and have taught it to some very well-known scholars that we know very, very well, because maybe some of you here are Shafi or Maliki, right? So you would know Imam Malik and Imam Shafi very well. And yeah, so that's my answer to that question.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, so let's move on to our next question, which is, are women and men not considered equal in Islam? For example, why don't men have to wear hijab? Why does the Quran say men are higher in degree over women? Why can't women lead prayer or be the leader of a country? Do 2 female witnesses account for 1 male?
You want to take that, Sana?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so are women and men considered equal in Islam? What exactly does equal mean here? Because if equal means by virtue, by like through righteousness, is their value equal in Islam? Then yes, the answer is yes, they are equal in Islam. But the examples that are given are all they all have to do really with Islamic laws. And the assumption here is that because men and women don't exactly get the same things every single time, then therefore somehow men are higher in the eyes of God than women, which isn't true, right? So we know that in Islam there are laws that pertain to women that sometimes don't pertain to men, and vice versa, right? And so just because laws are different does not mean that one is like better than the other. The reality of men and women is that men and women are different, right? So we know through science and psychology that men and women are different biologically, psychologically, and emotionally. And so to suggest that in order for men and women to be equal, they have to have the same laws for everything isn't very rational or productive, because the reality is that they're different. Men and women are different, so they have different needs. And that's why there are laws in Islam that are different, right? So there are some things that women get in Islam that men don't get. And then there are also laws that men have that women don't have, right? And so, yes, men and women are equal in Islam by virtue and by righteousness, but because the reality is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created men and women different, they have different needs. And Allah tells us in the Quran in ayah 231 that Allah knows and you don't know. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us divine recipe for life. And so he knows what's best for women, he knows what's best for men. And so just because laws are different doesn't make them unfair. It just means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us laws that will be good for men and good for women, even though sometimes men and women have different laws that pertain to them, basically.
Yeah. So the question was very loaded. So I think the first thing I want to say is, something that Sister Sana mentioned is that, women and men, they're biologically different. And so if you're biologically different, why are we even expecting them to be able to do the same thing? Right. And so, who is actually the one that's propagating for these rights? Because it really seems like to me that it's made the life of women much harder. When we're saying that women and men are biologically different, and now you're expecting them to be equal in almost every regard, you've actually made the life of women much, much harder, right? Like take I mean, there's so many examples. And so when you follow and accept Allah's laws, who has given the rights to women according to, their gender, and you've given rights to men according to, their kind of, differentiation, that is actually more liberating to me. And so another thing I wanted to mention is, some of these questions, like, for example, why can't women lead prayer? I wanted to actually challenge whoever asked that question, right? I wanted to say, what's wrong if a man leads the prayer? And the reason I say that is not because I don't want to answer the question. It's because some of these questions are coming from presupposed beliefs of what a woman's right is supposed to be in Islam. Rather than researching what rights are for women in Islam, we kind of have these like presupposed beliefs that, this is what men are supposed to do, and then this is what women are supposed to do. And so then we ask questions like, well, why can't a woman lead a prayer? So my question for that person is, what's wrong if a man leads the prayer? Who came and said that it's wrong, and who came and said that it's bad and it's unequal? So I think we need to start questioning where we're getting these morals and values from, rather than just running with it. So I feel like some of these questions actually need to be thought about and kind of re-questioned. But yeah, I hope that answers your question. Inshallah.
Great, mashallah. Okay, so moving on to our next question. The question is, when it comes to feminism versus Islam, how do they compare and contrast?
Yeah, so I'll take that one first, I guess. How do they compare and contrast? The question's really saying, how do you compare and contrast like something that's divine to something that's not divine? Because, it comes back to what is feminism, right? So feminism is tied to liberalism. The idea that you as a woman can just, let go of any sort of obligation or imposed obligations upon you, right? Just to just do whatever you want. Then that's really what liberalism is, that you have the right and freedoms to do whatever you want as long as you don't hurt anybody. But this completely contradicts Tawheed because we as Muslims, we know that in Islam, we follow Islam because we submit ourselves to Allah and that we don't get to do whatever we want, right? So we do have choices, and we can make our own decisions, but around what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has actually allowed for us to do, right? So for example, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, don't eat pork and don't drink alcohol, but almost everything else you can have, right? Like you can have any drink you want. You have water, pop, juice, anything, just don't have this one drink, which is alcohol, right? And when it comes to like dietary laws, for example, Allah did not tell us to refrain ourselves from much. Like, what is it? Like pork and, blood of an animal, don't eat. A dead animal, right? So if you're walking on the street and you see a dead animal, obviously you can't eat that. And like a few other things, right? Make sure it's halal, and also depends on your school of thought as well. But predominantly, you can basically eat whatever you want, right? Like it's almost whatever you want, right? But within the boundaries that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you, right? So as long as it's not anything that Allah has prohibited you from doing, you can eat that, right? And so Allah's given us so many options and choices, but within His divine decree. Okay, so but this is different than liberalism and feminism. Liberalism and feminism will say, no, you can eat that pork. No, you can eat that non-halal meat. You can eat or you can drink alcohol, right? So feminism and liberalism say, no, actually, God shouldn't tell you what to do. You should dictate what you want to do on your own accord, which is completely different than Islam, right? So I think that's the first thing that I would say about feminism and Islam and how they're different, right? One is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and one's divine, and one is man-made and very biased and flawed. and there's a huge difference between the two, right? So that's the first thing that I would say about that. And also that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us a divine recipe for life. And Allah tells us in the Quran that He knows us better than we do. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is self-sufficient and doesn't need you, okay? So He has no motive to oppress you. There's no reason for Him to not make you happy or not want you to be happy. He wants what's best for you. It's like a parent to a child, right? Your parent has no intentions. I mean, as long as they're, good parents, right? They don't have an intention to hurt you. But does that mean that they're going to give you everything that you want? No, right? Because getting everything that you want isn't good for you. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us a divine recipe for happiness. Whereas feminism and liberalism, right, they suggest that these isms provide happiness. And the individuals that advocate for them suggest that feminism and liberalism provide happiness. But the reality is that actually they don't, because, and there's research to back this up too. So subhanAllah, there has been a research paper, there is a research paper on this, and it's called The Paradox of Declining Female Happiness. And it's a longitudinal study, okay? And what they found out was that after they tracked and the happiness levels of these women that were a part of the study over time, they found out that with more rights that they obtained and in Western society, they actually became less happy. And so, the whole idea that feminism and liberalism, in extension to that, bring happiness is actually just not true. So really, what are you getting out of it? If you're following feminism and liberalism, which is in essence contradicting to Islam because you want to be happy, well, the reality is that they actually don't make you happy. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does, because Allah knows you better than you know yourself. And He tells us again in ayah 231, He knows and you don't know. So by us submitting ourselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we get the best of both worlds, right? We get the best of the dunya and the akhirah, right? And subhanAllah, that's what I would really say is the two big differences between feminism and Islam, is that one is from Allah and one isn't, and one provides real happiness and real justice, and the other just doesn't, even if it seems like it does. Yeah, and so that's what I say about that, and I'll give Kulsoom the opportunity to answer this question as well, inshallah.
I think that was beautifully answered. So I wouldn't really say anything different. I'm just going to reiterate what Sister Sana already just kind of mentioned. When we're defining feminism versus Islam, you want to clearly understand the roots of each, right? And so roots of feminism, it's built upon this principle of freedom, right? Freedom of thought, freedom of action, freedom of speech. And this is contradictory to Islam, which believes in submitting to the Creator, right? We don't have the freedom to make laws because we're very biased. As human beings, we're capable of error, we're capable of bias, and simply put, we're imperfect, right? While God, who is perfect, right, has that ability to guide humanity and for everything. So He has laws for orphans, for men, for women, for animals, for Black people, for white people, for every single aspect of life. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the laws. And so when we are contrasting feminism versus Islam, I would just say that, they're on the opposite of two spectrums. One wants liberation and one wants liberation in the sense of, you being able to define that liberation and freedom. And Islam also has liberation, but that liberation and that idea of freedom comes from God, who is perfect, whereas human beings are imperfect. So again, I would just reiterate what Sister Sana already said. So I hope
MashaAllah. I loved both of your answers to that question. I love that. Okay, so moving on to our next question. How should women be treated in Islam?
Okay, So I'll take this one. So in anything that we want to do and kind of act on, we want to always turn back to the Quran and Sunnah. So if the question is how should women be treated in Islam, we want to say, okay, well, what does the Quran say about that? What does the Sunnah say about that, right? And so let's look at the life of the Prophet, Prophet alayhi salam, and how he treated women. And one such example is, there was an incident, which is a very cute incident, where he was playing with his wife Aisha radiallahu anha, and they were racing against one another. And so that shows that, he was extremely playful. He treated them with respect and honor. And this is how we should treat women. And again, this is just one of the many different examples that are out there. And so how should women be treated in Islam? Women should be treated with respect. They should be treated with dignity. They should be treated with honor. And there's actually a question, I can't, there's so many questions now, but it was with regards to, why aren't women treated that way in the masajid? And why aren't revert women treated that way? And my heart goes out to that, because we're lacking Islam that these things are not happening. See, what happens is people start generalizing and saying, well, okay, if the masajid are treating women badly, and if the community are treating reverts badly, then that means that Islam is the problem. And I just wanted to remind you that no, Islam is not the problem. Islam actually gives a lot of room for people to treat women with honor and dignity. It's the people that have lacked in that implementation. So, I'm sorry to all the reverts, and I'm sorry to all the masajid that aren't implementing that. But to go back to the question, how should women be treated? Women should be treated like delicate flowers, be given that honor, be given that dignity. And yeah, that was just one of the examples that I wanted to, inshallah, Sister Sana do you have any more examples, Sana?
I think so. So, how should women be treated in Islam? So I think one thing to keep in mind is that, Muslims have mistakes and then they have sins, right? Like human behavior does not always represent Islam, right? So when we're talking about Islam, we're talking about the Quran and Sunnah. We're not talking about Muslims. You see the difference? So a Muslim is a person. It's who can make mistakes and do things that are wrong and have wrong ideas. But when we come back to the Quran and Sunnah, this is when we're talking about Islam, the deen of Allah, right? Which is different than what some people might do or say, and etc. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind, is that when we're trying to understand Islam and then we think of our own experiences, like, okay, well, why wasn't I treated that way? Yeah, like just like how Kulsoom just said it perfectly, right? Really sorry to hear that because it shouldn't have happened. But does that mean that that represents Islam? No, because we know the hadiths from the Prophet, right? Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. He said that the best of you are those who are best to their wives. He said that heaven lies under your mother's feet, right? Like there's honor and there's dignity and status for women in Islam. And so there's nothing in Islam that suggests that women should be disrespected or treated unfairly or not included. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala included you in the Quran. So this comes back to like what I was trying to say from before, is that really, really Islam is on a whole other level when it comes to how it dealt with just the discussion of women. Allah speaks to you in the Quran. In other religious texts, women aren't even spoken to. The writer, right? Because if we're talking about the Bible, for example, right? And it's not like I'm saying anything that's wrong. Even Christians and Jews know this as well, that men wrote the Bible. And I mean that literally, men wrote the Bible for men. And subhanAllah, like I've actually read many parts of the Bible myself. So I've seen it with my own two eyes, and the way that it's written, the way that it's speaking to its reader, women aren't there. Women just aren't there. And when Allah tells us in the Quran that men and women will be rewarded in Jannah for the things that they used to do, the believing men, the believing women, like you are actually a part of the conversation. And I think that's really honorable and dignifying. Allah considered you, Allah spoke to you, Allah's talking about you in the Quran for everybody to read. So I think like we really need to come back to the Quran and Sunnah when it comes to questions like this, because sometimes we get too bogged down in, okay, what did this Muslim person say to me that one day? Or, oh, look at these Muslims on the news, like, you know, that's not very respectful and dignifying, et cetera, et cetera. But again, Muslims oftentimes don't represent Islam. And so really, when the question's asking, you know, how are women supposed to be treated in Islam? With dignity, with honor, with respect. And, you know, subhanAllah, Allah also tells men and women to lower their gaze towards women, especially in the times that we're living in, where it's celebrated and plastered everywhere, that, you know, you should look good in public and sexualize yourself, right? And men look, subhanAllah, I've caught many men looking at things they should not be looking at in public. So it's very common that men don't, because looking is an act of disrespect. You're not looking at her as a human being. You're really looking at her as something else. And it's, you know, we know in Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells men and women to lower their gaze for a reason, right? Because there's honor and respect towards human beings in general and to women included. And so I feel like this question just has a very simple answer. It's not supposed to be complicated, but because there's so much, misinformation out there and misunderstandings and bias, oftentimes I feel like Muslims have to over-explain something that's very simple. How should women be treated in Islam? With dignity, honor, and respect. That's pretty much it. And there's nothing in Islam to actually suggest otherwise. So, and if somebody does want to, you know, try to say otherwise, then they're gonna have to bring proof for it. But they can't find the proof for it because it's not there.
Okay, so moving on to our next question. Many women leave Islam because of family forcing the hijab. How should we properly enforce the hijab on Muslim women?
Okay.
I know you're passionate about this topic, so go ahead and take it, Sana.
Okay, sure. So how should we be properly enforcing hijab on Muslim women? That's the question. Because what you said before that was like a statement. Okay, many women leave Islam because of how families have treated them. Okay, but the question really is, how should we properly enforce hijab on Muslim women? Or how should we encourage Muslim women to wear hijab, right? Because we can't really force people to do things, especially when it comes to the deen. Allah tells us in the Quran, there's no compulsion in deen-related things. Like, it really needs to be your own choice, right? And you as a Muslim would naturally choose to submit yourself to Allah, which would include wearing the hijab. And so I think this is a really good question because definitely it's relevant. So how should we properly enforce hijab on Muslim women? So I'm thinking of this in a way that's like family oriented. So maybe like parents to children, right? So if your child, how we want to raise our children we want to raise our children in an Islamic environment from the beginning anyways, right? And so I think that when you raise your children in an Islamic environment and really just teach them the deen, and coupled with being that role model, then they'll naturally just wear it anyways. Because subhanAllah, I've heard so many times from Muslim women, like when you ask them, why do you wear hijab? A lot of them say, well, you know, I was like 10, 12, 15, whatever. And there was a lot of Muslim women in my family who wore the hijab. So that's why I wore the hijab, because there was that role model, right? The people around them wore hijab and they thought, well, this is the right thing to do. And everybody else is doing it. They feel encouraged, right? But coupled with the understanding of the deen, right? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did tell women to dress in a particular way, which is not just covering your hair, but it's also covering your body, right? And I think sometimes Muslim women forget that it is, you know, you have to wear the jilbab as well. You have to cover your body. It's not just your hair and your ears and your neck and your chest. It's almost everything. Well, yeah, almost everything except for your face and your hands. And so the advice that I would give to a parent on, you know, a parent who wants to, who would want their daughter to wear the hijab, first and foremost, you need to be that role model to your child, because if you're telling them, go wear hijab, and you're not wearing the hijab, they're not going to take you seriously. And also, raise them with that Islamic environment. Just teach them about the deen, teach them about Allah, and they'll naturally wear it themselves anyway. But also there's another way of looking at this, is that what if you're a parent and your daughter is, I don't know, like 15, 16, 17, 20, 25, whatever, right? Obviously she's hit puberty at that point, and she's not wearing the hijab, and you want to encourage her to wear the hijab. And as the person stated, whoever asked this question, that a lot of women leave because it's being forced upon them when they don't really want to do it. And they leave Islam because of it. And so the way that I would go about doing that is through a lot of hikmah and wisdom, because trying to change someone's behavior is probably one of the hardest things to do. And so definitely you don't want to just, shove the hijab and so onto somebody when they don't really understand why they need to do that, or if they don't want to do that, right? Because at the end of the day, if you're forcing her to wear hijab and then she hates Islam for it and she leaves the deen entirely, that's worse than her staying Muslim and believing in Islam and not wearing hijab, okay? Like, one is that she's still a believer, the other is that she's not even a Muslim anymore. So I think that you have to tread this the water carefully, okay? And teach them about the deen. Don't just tell them, oh, in Islam you have to wear hijab, you have to only eat halal meat, you have to pray 5 times a day. Just stop shoving Islamic laws in people's faces when they don't really understand the deen first. You have to teach people what Islam is. And then naturally, with as time goes on, they'll love the deen, because there's absolutely people who learn about Islam, they'll fall in love with it, because what's not to love about Islam? Okay, so they'll love the deen and they'll want to wear it on their own accord, and they'll get rewarded for it. Because at the end of the day, our deeds are way based off of our intentions. Like, if she's wearing hijab only because you're forcing her to, not because it's for the sake of Allah, not because Allah told her to, but because, oh, if I don't wear this, then my parents are going to get upset with me and that's why I'm wearing it, then like, what reward is she going to get on the day of judgment for wearing the hijab that you forced her to wear, if it's not for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So I think that this issue needs to be treated wisely. And I don't think that the solution is just to force your daughter to do something that she doesn't want to do, she doesn't understand, right? Like, so two main points to take away from this is that teach your kids young, what the deen is, raise them in an Islamic environment, be their role model. And if you're in a situation where, maybe you didn't raise them in an Islamic environment and your child doesn't wear hijab, don't force it on them, but teach them about the deen, invite them, right? Be loving to them. Don't just shove Islamic laws in their face when they don't want to follow them, or they don't understand why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is asking them to do that, right? Because then you'll fall into that issue. And I see it all the time as well. I think the number one reason why a lot of, ex-Muslims on YouTube and Instagram and Facebook and wherever, if you ask them, why'd you leave Islam? They'll be like, oh yeah, like my family was so abusive and oppressive because they made me wear hijab, right? So I think this whole issue needs to be dealt with in an appropriate way. And I think the way it has been dealt with amongst some families, not all, is not the best way to do that. And so that's what I would say for that question. And I'm sure Kulsoom has some other things to say about that, inshallah.
Yeah, these questions really make me really sad, because it really shows that, in a lot of ways, we're kind of failing as a community. And I don't want to have like that defeatist mentality, but like, you know, we want to kind of look at the reality as well, because we are failing to nurture amongst our children Islamic values. And so when they fail to follow those values, we get annoyed, we get agitated, and then we start using very harsh techniques, which pushes them further, right? So simply put, in order for your children and daughters to practice the hijab or anything else that Islam requires, you want to instill the value of submitting to Allah from an early age, right? Notice how I said not the value of wearing the hijab, right? Because if you help them understand why they're submitting to Allah and that they have to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wearing the hijab, praying, or doing anything that Islam requires for you is going to be much, much easier, right? So make sure that from an early age, right, when they're conscious, when they're 9 years old, when they can make sense of things, and you're having conversations with them, help them understand why they're submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Help them understand that they wholeheartedly have to submit to Allah. And once they have this value and they start living by this value, inshallah, you know, wearing the hijab or any other obligation is going to be a little less difficult, obviously coupled with examples of other women who, even though they have that challenge of maybe wearing the hijab, they're still kind of persevering. So it's a combination of many different things, but the first one is instilling that value from an early age. And I actually wanted to pause for a second because someone from an anonymous attendee asked a question which was kind of related to this, but it's kind of not. So we're not really going to be answering the question, but I wanted to comment on his or her question before we move on. And the question was that I joined late. I'm currently struggling with dealing with cultural barriers and rights that Islam provides for women. How would you advise someone dealing with this, specifically when it comes to your own family? And so, this hot topic today isn't about culture and stuff. And I know that's one topic that Sana really is passionate about too. So maybe we can do another hot topic on just culture and dealing with that. But even dealing with cultural barriers, you always want to take it back to the root, right? It always has to be Islam as opposed to culture, right? So not Islam versus culture, but always like making sure that you understand the Islamic values of why you're doing something. So even dealing with these cultural barriers with parents, with children, with whoever, you want to help people understand how to go back to the root of Islam. What does Islam say about this? So, we as youth, as older people, have to start cultivating Islam in our everyday life. And when we do that, our youth are going to see that as well. And when our youth see that, inshallah, navigating some of these challenges are going to be a little bit more easier, inshallah. So I hope that answers that person's question.
Okay, so moving on to our next question. Can a person be a good Muslim while being a feminist or a liberal / secular Muslim?
Yeah. No, so not to that question, but I was just getting my train of thought there in case like someone, mistakens it and runs with it. This question, I feel like we've answered in the last like 1.5 hours that we've been talking. Look, if you say something like Muslim feminist or Muslim liberal, you're literally putting them on the same spectrum, right? And that's not fair because Islam and feminism and Islam and secularism are on opposite sides of the spectrum. So this is Islam and this is feminism and this is like liberalism. So they can't be put together because they have different values. They have different values, they have different beliefs, they have different roots. So the simple answer to that question is no. You cannot be a Muslim feminist. You cannot be a Muslim liberal. You cannot be a Muslim secular. You cannot be a Muslim anything. You're Muslim, period. Right? Islam is sufficient to help you to form your personality and advocate for all that you want to advocate for. Now, with that said, I do want to empathize against women because I understand where you're coming from. I get why you want to turn to feminism and I get why you want to turn to other laws to help you get the rights that, women are supposed to have. Because, evidently these days we also don't see Islam present, right? We don't see a lot of Muslim people practicing Islam. And so I understand, where that notion is coming from, but that still doesn't mean that we have to turn to, man-made values or man-made laws to get that to get that justice, to get that, honor that you need. Islam is the solution. So I would say go back to Islam, learn about Islam, see what Islam says about women and laws and empowerment and all these things, and try to work to spread the message of Islam as opposed to spreading the message of feminism, for example. So yeah, the answer to that question is no.
Yeah, I felt the same way as Kulsoom, because really what the question is asking, like, can you be a Muslim, can you be a good Muslim and be a feminist or a secular liberal? Like what you're really asking is, like, can you be a good believer while also following kufr? Like, obviously the answer is no, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran that the only way is the way of Islam. The only way he accepts is Islam. The only deen he accepts is Islam. And so feminism, secular liberalism does not come from Islam. It comes from the West and mainly Europe, right? No, the answer is definitely no. I don't want to talk too much about secular liberalism, because I think most individuals here who have an understanding of what secular liberalism is and what Islam is would understand why putting Muslim and secular liberal together is just an oxymoron. Like, it doesn't even make sense, because they're quite opposites. But when it comes to Muslim feminist, I think sometimes people don't really understand why it's an issue to call yourself a Muslim feminist, right? And where's the contradiction here? Because if Islam empowers women, well, feminism empowers women, like, so what's the issue here? The issue is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already given you Islam as a complete deen. It's a socio-political system. Nothing is left out. Allah tells us that he has perfected his deen in the Quran. So nothing's left out, it's complete. And then when you as an individual want to turn to feminism that does not come from Allah, that is man-made, that why would you turn to feminism when you could turn to Islam? Because Islam comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it has everything that you need to get the rights that you should have. Whereas feminism comes from people. It's a man-made way of thinking. It's a man-made ideology. And so, what we need to come back to is that, okay, who really has the proper solution here? Allah or people, right? Is Allah ever wrong? Does Allah not know something? Maybe he's gonna leave it out. Like, no, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all-knowing. Allah is always right. And so anything that he prescribes to the human being is right. Okay, but anything that human beings come up with on their own leave room for error, and it leaves room for bias. Anytime there is bias, right? What is bias? Okay, bias is when you essentially favor or consider yourself more than the other. Okay, and so oftentimes when, okay, if we think of this from a political perspective, like if people are making laws and legislation, and naturally they're biased, right? They're going to favor themselves. And this is exactly what we see in society today. Like, name one place that actually has real justice, because that doesn't exist in the world that we see today, because Islam is not implemented. So people are making laws and legislation, but really it's making the rich richer and the poor poorer. And oftentimes women are left out. That's why there's still a women's march every year, right? Feminists still exist. Women are still advocating for women's rights because they don't have it yet, because they're relying on people to give them what they need, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has already done that in Islam. So in the Quran, he says that I have completed your deen for you. Like, there's nothing left out. And so you as a believer, as a Muslim, right? It's not like I'm talking to a non-Muslim here, right? Like, the question was, can you be a good Muslim and still be a feminist or secular liberal? You as a Muslim, you know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you everything that you need. So why, like, it doesn't rationally make sense as to why a Muslim would seek anything other than Islam to get rights, to feel empowered, to find their worth in this dunya, right? So it doesn't really make sense. And again, saying that you're a Muslim feminist is just, or a Muslim secular liberal, is really just mixing Islam with kufr. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it very, very, very clear in the Quran. Islam is the only way that he accepts. If you die on anything else other than Islam, then that's not good for you. This is totally clear in the Quran and Sunnah. So definitely you cannot be a good practicing believer in the eyes of Allah if you turn to kufr to solve your issues. And again, right, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also mentions in the Quran that none of them will believe until they take you, O Messenger. And there are a couple of ayats on this. Some ayats mention Allah and the Messenger, some of them just mention the Messenger, but generally speaking, if you as a Muslim don't turn to Allah and the Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, for legislation, for solutions, then you're not really truly a believer. And Allah actually says that. Like, you have to actually turn to Allah and the Messenger and submit yourself to what they have legislated if you are a believer. So this idea that you can be a Muslim feminist or a Muslim secular liberal just doesn't exist in Islam. You can't mix kufr with iman. Like, you can't mix the two. Like, are you a believer or are you not a believer? It's like when you say you're a Muslim feminist or a Muslim secular liberal, you're trying to put one foot in iman, one foot in kufr, and then like get away with it. That's really what you're asking, right, in this question. Is that, can I just have like a little bit of kufr in my life, and is that going to be okay in the eyes of Allah, right? Which, again, the answer is just a no. Yeah, so I'll leave it at that, basically.
Okay, so our next question is, how should we respond to people, both Muslim and non-Muslim, who claim that Islam oppresses women?
Yeah, so I would say bring forth your proof because a claim is just that. It's just a claim until you provide the evidence. So if you cannot provide the evidence, then it's just a baseless, absurd claim, right? So the onus is actually on you to provide proof for your claim. So if someone's claiming that Islam oppresses women, okay, fine, bring your proof. If you bring your proof, then you can, win that argument and the claim is true. But if you cannot bring proof, then, I don't think we should cater to claims, because if you're just using the acts of a few people to define the whole religion, to define the whole deen, then you're really generalizing. For example, it's like saying we found one Christian who kills people, therefore the whole religion of Christianity advocates for killing people, right? So just because you found maybe, some people anywhere in the world that were oppressing women doesn't mean that Islam oppresses women. And so if you're making that claim, then bring valid proof with evidence, and then we can talk. But if there isn't any evidence, then I don't think we need to cater to claims, because anyone can make a baseless claim about anything today. So, yeah. You want to add anything to that, Sana?
Yes. So, okay. So the question said, like, how should we, which I'm assuming is Muslims, how should Muslims respond to a Muslim or a non-Muslim who claims that Islam oppresses women? So if a Muslim person says that Islam is oppressive to women, I would just simply ask the person, like, are you Muslim? Like, just, are you Muslim? Do you believe, and are you convinced that, with evidence, are you convinced? Do you have a conviction that this is the Quran and Sunnah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Yes or no? If the answer is yes, then okay, you're a Muslim, you're a believer. And if the answer is no, then okay, you're in the other category of this question. If you're a Muslim, then you accept that the Quran and Sunnah is from Allah. And how can you, as a Muslim who has this conviction, also suggest that it's oppressive, when in the Quran, Allah says that he's the most just and the most fair. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the self-sufficient. What does he get out of, again, like, how does it rationally make sense that, why would Allah want to oppress you? What does Allah get out of from your like suffering and misery. Like he doesn't, but he doesn't get anything out of that because Allah is self-sufficient. Allah doesn't have needs. Okay. And so you as a Muslim, right, I would just ask you, like, are you Muslim? Because if you think Islam oppresses women, then you probably have a load of other questions and issues that probably need to be like resolved as well. But if you say yes to this question, then I would ask you simply like, okay, so how does it make sense that Allah would be oppressive? But then when this claim comes from non-Muslims, I would ask them for proof, right? So first of all, what is oppression, and how is oppression in how does oppression what's the word? How is that shown in Islam, right? Because at the end of the day, you need to really come back to your terms, okay? So oppression is cruel or unjust treatment. So if you're going to say that Islam is cruel to women or unjust to women, then you need proof for it. And if you're making the claim, then it's on your shoulders to prove it. That's what I would say for the Muslim asking this and for the non-Muslim asking this. That's what I would say.
Yeah, and I quickly wanted to comment, right, on this because it's something that commonly comes up when people are trying to give da'wah. And I understand where the question is coming from, right? It's like a lot of sincerity in people because they want to spread Islam, they want to stand up for Islam. And so I guess this is a reminder to myself and everyone here that when you're giving da'wah, you don't always have to stand up by answering and defending yourself. You don't always want to get in the defense. For example, if someone comes and they start calling me ugly, they're like, you're ugly and you're a hippo, right? I hope no one would say that. I'm not going to sit there and explain to them for the next 10 minutes why I'm not ugly and why I'm not a hippo, right? So the same thing, it's like with Islam, one, you want to be confident in your own deen. So go and learn the evidence, go and become confident so no one can come and like shake you when they start making absurd claims from nowhere. And be confident. People are always going to corner you. So if people come and make absurd claims about anything, you don't have to, try not to get intimidated, rather question them, right? Like we have to be people who use evidence to kind of have these conversations. So if they don't have evidence, you're just going to go back and forth. So just kind of advice to myself and everyone here as well, inshallah. But yeah, we can move on.
Okay, so the next question we have here is the Sharia fair and just when it comes to women and women's rights?
You want to take that, Sana?
Yeah, sure, I'll go first. So is the Sharia fair and just towards women and women's rights? The answer is, of course, because it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But I'm trying to think of this in a way because as a Muslim, I've already come to that conviction that this is from Allah, so therefore it's fair. But for a non-Muslim who doesn't accept that, right, how would you go about answering that question to them? So what I would remind this person is that actually the Sharia has to be fair and just towards women because it came from Allah, right? And you can give them those evidences and proof that it's from Allah, right? And so once you get to that point, then you can say, okay, so Allah gave us these laws. And so therefore, if it's from Allah, then it has to be just and fair. And we know that it has to be just and fair because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again, is unbiased and he's all knowing. Okay, it really comes back to these two things that I feel like I'm just repeating myself at this point. Allah is unbiased. He does not get anything out of oppressing you. He doesn't gain anything. He doesn't lose anything. He's self-sufficient. And that means that he's unbiased. He has no motive to do that. Okay. And then the second thing is that he's all knowing. Allah knows the past, present, and future at the same time. He knows you better than you know your own self. He knows everything in the universe. He's fully equipped to make laws for humanity because he has all of the knowledge. He can take everything into consideration to provide human beings with the best outcome for life. Whereas human beings, we don't know much. And everybody knows that. I think it would be very arrogant for someone to try to suggest that we know everything that there is to know, because we don't. And we are biased. You know, you ask anybody, are human beings biased? And be like, yeah, of course, everyone has a bias. And so these are just two facts that we already know about human beings, that we don't know everything. We're very limited in knowledge, and we are biased. So what gives us the authority to try to tell people what their rights should and shouldn't be, and what you should be allowed to do, what you shouldn't be allowed to do? Like you are not in the best position to do that. And so why are you doing it? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in the best position to do that. So that's why he did it for us. He sent us the Quran and Sunnah that is complete, right? It's a complete socio-political of life, and there's nothing left out of it. And so with that, the answer is yes, of course. The Sharia is 100% fair for men and women, because it gives men and women exactly what they need to achieve success in life and to be happy, and for everything there's a balance, and everyone gets their fair share, and nobody steps over anybody else. Yeah, so that's what I would say about that, and I'll just leave it there.
Yeah, so is the Sharia fair and just when it comes to the women and women's rights, right? I would say, who is defining what is just and fair? Because the answer really depends on that. For example, if you take a child who's eating candy like nonstop, and the parent asks them to stop and kind of takes away the candy, the child is going to say that, oh, the parent is being so unfair and the parent is so unjust. And, you know, but are they being unfair? Right? Ask yourself, if you're a parent here, are you being unfair if you take candy from a child who's eating it consistently, may get cavities? Or do they actually know what's in their best interest? Right? So the same kind of thinking applies here, because if we get our, you know, the child is biased, it wants the candy, it has limited knowledge, it doesn't understand the harms and benefits of the chocolate, of the candy. So of course, to that child, that parent is going to seem unjust, and this act is going to seem unjust. So if we're defining just and fair from, you know, a very limited bias perspective, then things are always going to seem unjust and unfair. Right? But if we get our idea from, you know, the one who's not biased, who is perfect, in that context, in that definition, then yes, you know, Islam is definitely just, it's definitely fair. And like we said, the Sharia law, it's there to help women and to help men and to help everyone. So I think whenever we try to define justice and define this idea of fairness, you really want to understand depending on who, because that will really, the answer will vary on that, inshallah. So yeah, we can move on, inshallah.
Okay, so our next question is, it's an interesting one. So are terrorists fair when it comes to dealing with women in countries with terrorist presence?
See, like, I'm really not trying to be like rude with my answers, but like, can you repeat the question again, Narusha? I want everyone to hear the question again.
Yeah, for sure, I will. So the question is, are terrorists fair when it comes to dealing with women in countries with terrorist presence?
It's like, you know, a terrorist is defined as what? A terrorist is defined as someone who uses unlawful violence and intimidation. So someone who's using unlawful violence and intimidation, how can that be fair? So, you know, like, I really want people to stop using absurd examples from absurd people to define Islam and fit your belief of what Islam is. I don't know who asked the question, and it's fine, you know, everyone has the right to ask the question, but when you're saying that are terrorists fair when it comes to dealing with women, it's like you probably already have a presupposed belief, and now you're just trying to find an answer that fits that. And it's ridiculous. It's absurd. So I don't think I'm going to answer that. No, it definitely does not. Terrorists are unlawful. They use intimidation. They use violence. And yeah, it's not fair at all. So yeah, there's my answer. And yeah, sorry, someone in the chat said like terrorism and fair are on two separate ends of the spectrum. So it's a very silly question to say the least. But you know, someone asked it, so we do have to give them their due right. So now I'll let you add to that frustration of mine.
Yeah, so typically I don't answer Islamophobic questions because it is an Islamophobic question. So instead of just regurgitating what Kulsoom had said, I'll actually just go ahead and answer why it's Islamophobic, because the premise to this question is that terrorists in the Middle East or in other parts of Asia somehow they represent Islam or Muslims at large, and therefore whatever their actions are represents us or represents Islam, which just isn't true. So the premise of the question is wrong, and the premise of the question is Islamophobic and racist. And so yeah, that's what I'm going to say about that question. And there are I mean, again, like with all due respect to the person who asked the question, there are wrong questions out there, and this is definitely one of them.
Should we try some of the Q&A, or do you want to stick to the questions that we got from before?
I mean, let's go ahead and finish the questions that people asked ahead of time, and then maybe inshallah we'll look through these ones.
Sure.
Okay, so this next question is a bit lengthy. So in the same way Islam empowers people through submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I feel that a woman also gets further empowerment through letting their husbands lead them. This seems contradictory to normal understandings of women empowerment, but I really think is true because it leads to a healthier family order at home, which in the end makes everyone happy. My question is, what is your take on women empowerment in relation to being able to let your husband lead you instead of trying to compete and take lead?
Okay, yeah, so it was a very loaded question, and it's also a very broad question because, again, you know, I've talked about it a little bit before, but it really goes back to what I said before, right? Any notion, and let's break it down. So any notion of empowerment, any notion of freedom has to come from Islam. Okay, so what does Islam say about dealing with your husband? I really want us to get into that mindset of going back to Islam, right? Not coming in with a presupposed belief or a presupposed disposition and trying to find answer. It's like, you know, people who go fatwa shopping because they want a particular answer. So let's try to get away from that and really just go back to the roots. If we have a question, let's see, what does the Quran say? What does the Sunnah say about that? And unfortunately, what's happened is women have lost their sense of Islam and they've started defining empowerment for themselves, which, to be honest, has led them to a lot of trouble, right? So for example, I'm a working woman. I know Sana works, and I know a lot of the women, Yerusha works, everyone here works. But women don't have to work if they don't want to, okay? They're given the choice, they're given the freedom. And again, to answer that one question from before, does Islam give freedom to women? Yes, it does. But women don't have to work. And this actually makes it easier. You know, they can if they want to. I do, but they don't have to. So women who are insisting upon equality, now no matter what, they go and find work because they want equality, right? If men can work, then I can work. And don't tell me that there's not a moment, you know, during like your pregnancy, during your menstrual cycle, when you don't feel like going to work, right? When you have to go to work and it's like 11 p.m., 12 p.m. at night, and you're a little scared because it's just really, really dark outside. Don't tell me that you don't face some of these struggles, right? So, you know, you really can thank all the movements for that because we've made life a little bit harder, right? So Islam gives women a lot of freedom. It gives women a lot of choice. You know, you can work if you want to. You don't have to work if you don't want to. But when now we come and say, no, you must have equality with men. So if men are working, you have to work. If men are doing this, then we have to do this. That's created a lot of problems for women. And so, you know, to answer the question, you know, what is your take on women empowerment in relationships to being able to let your husband lead instead of you trying to compete and take lead? Let's go back and learn about our roles. What is the husband's role? Because this isn't a marriage webinar, and alhamdulillah, one of our instructors at I3 Institute, Sister Dua, does a marriage halaqah. So I would encourage women to join that and learn what are the roles of women when it comes to marriage. What's the role of husbands? Know your roles and know your rights so that you're not being taken advantage of either, but at the same time, you're not falling into like the wrong trap. So that's what I would say, because it's a very broad question and sometimes it's really hard to answer these broad questions. So I have to answer it as generally as possible, inshallah. So I'll let Sana wrap up, inshallah.
Okay, so what is your take on women empowerment in relationship to being able to let your husband lead you instead of competing and trying to take lead? So I think that there is a premise, right, a bias in this question that assumes that just because within a Muslim marriage, right, between a Muslim husband and a Muslim wife, if he takes lead, then somehow that's like oppressive to women. Like the reality is that these things actually aren't correlated at all, because what is a leader, right? A leader is someone who does, take charge and does lead, right? You're kind of like your go-to person. If you have a question, you need help with something, that's what a leader is for. But a leader is also, very celebrated in society, like being a leader. Like there's always those like programs that you can pay like online, like how to be a leader in your workplace, how to be a leader in a I don't know, when you're doing a project for school or something. Like there's always, being a leader is seen as something good in society, right? And it is. But being a leader has particular attributes, right? Being a leader, when someone is a leader, typically they are reliable, responsible, they're, willing to put themselves in someone else's shoes to make sure that everything's running smoothly and everyone's being taken care of. They're confident, they're ready to act, they're there if you need them. And so when we put this into a relationship scenario, right, like a marriage, this is what every Muslim woman would want in their husband: someone who's going to be there for them, someone they can rely on, someone who will be a leader to them, right? Because a relationship's not just about whatever you want. You actually have to consider the other person, and they're kind of like you're kind of like two peas in a pod, right? Like you're there to be, like you're there for each other. And so this idea that if your husband's a leader, somehow that's oppressive, when it's not. Your husband's supposed to be there for you. And this is what, like, you as a Muslim woman, right, listening to this, like, would you want a husband who's just out and about all the time, doesn't answer your calls, doesn't care about you, just like, oh yeah, do whatever you want kind of thing? No, like, you don't want that. You want someone who's like engaging with your life. That's why they married you. Right? And so I don't see the correlation between your husband being a leader and of the wife not being empowered. Like there's no relationship between the two, because him being a leader and being the husband that Islam has told him to be, right? Let's just say this is the optimal best scenario, that your husband actually acts how he's supposed to, right? That doesn't mean that you as the wife cannot be empowered, because there's nothing oppressive about your husband being a leader. You can still work if you want to work. You still have rights as a wife. Those don't go away. You still have rights over your children. You have rights over whatever property you might own. Nothing goes away, right? And so there's this fantasy, like la la land idea that, oh, in the Muslim world, when husbands are leaders or seen as leaders in a family setting, that this is somehow oppressive to Muslim women, when it's not, right? And so this idea that men taking charge or being leaders has anything to do with female empowerment, again, just comes from Western ideologies, right? So it comes from Western feminism, for example, that the idea for you to be empowered, actually you have to do whatever you want. And you're an independent woman, right? Like you work and you do all that stuff, but your husband doesn't get to tell you what to do. Your husband isn't your leader. He's like your partner. He's like your, how do I put this? He doesn't have a say in anything that you do. And this somehow has become the ideal in a marriage, when that's not really how marriage works. And so what I would say to this question is that the idea that your husband being a leader doesn't really have anything to do with you being empowered or not empowered. Like the two don't really go together. But you're like, your husband being a leader doesn't mean that you're not an empowered person. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has empowered you and has given you rights and has given you options and choices in your life. And that has, and one of those things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did give you was, a husband who's supposed to act in a particular way that's just and fair for you and the children, basically. That's what I would say for that question. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay, guys. So I just wanted to ask you guys if you wanted to look into the Q&A and answer any questions from there.
Yeah, actually, I was like scrolling through and I was hoping that I would be able to just comment. I'm not going to say answer, but I'm going to comment on one of it just because, some of these aren't really related to the topic, but they're kind of relevant, right? So 3 of the questions were related to reverts. So I'm going to go ahead and read them out and then kind of answer that and another question in a nutshell because they're all related, okay? So a revert gets a lot of support before and during Shahada, alhamdulillah. How can a revert Muslimah feel empowered when her community sisters are not welcoming after her Shahada and does name calling by calling her fake or a kafir? Okay. And how can a revert Muslimah feel empowered or supported when she approaches the masjid imam to seek help with khula due to physical violence, but is rather pushed towards seeking marriage counseling and suggested to get along with the abusive husband and stay in the marriage? A revert doesn't have her Muslim's family to stand with her and support her through this. And then how can the Muslim community empower or help the reverts and new Muslims in their journey of Islam? So these 3 questions. And the last question by a sister was, in today's Western world, which Muslim women's rights are evident and compared to feminism? So I'm going to kind of couple these together and answer it, right? My heart goes out whenever a question is posed about reverts. Why? Because they're just very close to my heart. I've had a lot of revert friends, and my mom's best friend was my best friend's mom was a revert, and my husband's a revert as well. And these questions are evidence of the fact that we as a community need to step up. So there's around, 20 plus people in this chat and on the YouTube channel probably tuning into this. And so I'm not going to address the reverts that asked the question. I'm going to address the community. We need to step up and we need to start instilling in ourselves the proper Islamic values, right? If we start instilling in us the proper Islamic values, no one else is ever going to feel left out. No revert, no Black person, no woman is ever going to want to, not go to a masjid because we weren't implementing Islam. We are representing Islam when we're in leadership positions. So if you're an imam of a masjid, you're in a leadership position. If you're a part of like a women's club or organization, you're in a leadership position. So the onus is on you to welcome everyone, right? Through proper Islamic values. So, these questions that are asked, how can I get support? I guess my answer is to the people that are listening to this, let's try and create programs for our reverts brothers and sisters. Let's try and be more accommodating when they come into the community and different gatherings and events. And if you are part of a masjid board, then, let's try to create some systems in place to help these things. And the other question that was asked was, how can the Muslim community empower? Oh, sorry. The question just got removed from here. But it was the question that was asking, what are proper Islamic things that are shown right now? And the thing is that if we look at society as a whole, there are and there aren't a lot of Islamic examples, right? Because we don't have a lot of Islam present. Like if you're using Muslim countries as the as a judgment factor for what Islam is supposed to be, unfortunately it's not. And so I think the onus really falls on all us individuals to try our best to try and implement Islam the best that we can with the things that we are able to. So I hope that answers that question for that sister who asked it. And with regard to the reverts, again, what can we do? This is something for the community to do. And I hope that if you're part of any board or organization, that you're continuing to take these concerns into account and dealing with it effectively, inshallah. So those are all the questions I wanted to address from the Q&A. And Sana, if you wanted to read any of the questions and answer, you can go ahead.
Sorry, just unmuting myself. I think that I don't have much to add to what you had said. I felt like you explained that really well. There was a question about, because I did speak on a little bit about like Judaism and Christianity, comparing that to Islam, right? So someone had asked for references. I actually have the book. It's called Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. Okay, it's by Paula Fredrickson. It's on page actually 1 second, let me find I believe it's on page like around 58, something like that, where all of the references are there. And actually the author does talk about purity laws, like right there, it says purity. Yeah, and it starts talking about it. And so I don't have actual like verses from the Bible off the top of my head, but actually this author, it talks about what I was talking about in the book. So if you want, this is the best reference that I can give you for now. But yeah, that's all I wanted to say, was to answer that person's question, that I wasn't just speaking out of ignorance, like scholars have been saying that about Judaism and Christianity. But let me just quickly read the other questions just to see if there's anything else that hasn't already been mentioned.
Yeah, and while you read the question, I just wanted to say something, right? Because I was reading the chat and like kind of scrolling through it a little bit here and there. And one thing I wanted to mention, and this is a reminder to myself first and foremost, is whenever a new concept is put forth, it can be really hard to accept, right? Because a lot of the beliefs that are out there in society, we actually have within us as well. And it's happened subconsciously because, a lot of us are born here, a lot of us are raised here. And so I think that we have to be really patient when we hear something that is not what we've known all our life, or someone else is saying something. Just be open-minded in the sense of, just learn, see what they're saying, and ask yourself, okay, where did I get my knowledge from? Where did I get my belief from? And we, and including myself, have to just cleanse our mind of all these kufr beliefs and all these wrong beliefs and ideologies, and really start to relearn what Islam actually is. So I hope that through this hot topic and all these other hot topics, we're able to, really let go of these beliefs and patterns that we have when it comes to interpreting Islam, and be able to learn what Islam actually is, the way that the Sahaba and the Prophet and everyone understood it. May Allah have mercy upon them. So that's my last comment, I promise, and I will let you answer any other questions.
I think all of the questions that have been asked have been discussed already, either directly or indirectly. So I believe that we can end the event here. I don't have anything else to add. I feel like Kulsoom basically added all the comments that I would have added. Inshallah, I hope everyone here benefited. And if you did have a question that you didn't get an answer for, I do apologize. I feel like we did answer everything, but if you really still have more questions, then definitely reach out to the I3 Institute and you can get an answer, inshallah. But we'll leave it at that.
Everyone for attending and being patient.
Jazakallah khair to our hosts for today's session. MashaAllah, you guys were really, really informative and inspiring. Alhamdulillah. And I hope all of you guys benefited and can continue to carry on and championing, women's empowerment within your own communities and your own households. And before you guys go, I just wanted to promote our YD program, which is a one-year diploma program where students will learn Aqidah, Tazkiyah, Usul al-Fiqh, along with other modules with a flexible time commitment of just 2 hours per week, crafted to work for both students and working professionals. So you can register for YD today at i3institute.ca/register. I'll send a link in the chat as well. So if you have any other questions, like the sisters mentioned, about hot topics, you can email us at hottopicsseries@i3institute.ca. And I'll put that also as well in the chat so that you guys can have that as well. But yes, just keep joining us for our future hot topic sessions, inshallah. And I want to end off with a dua. May Allah grant us all the knowledge and wisdom to implement the solutions that He has given us, because He has truly given us all the solutions we need for life's problems. And may Allah make us firm on that. Ameen. So Jazakallah khair, everyone, for joining, and stay safe. Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone.
Alaikum salam.